Cold millionaire CEO ignored every woman until his maid's daughter melted his walls. We never told her she was part of the family, just close enough to serve, close enough to hurt. He was born into a world of silver spoons and silent rules, but he fell for the one girl. She was meant to disappear quietly, like all the others, but he remembered the way she once looked at him, not for his power, but for his silence. And when they tried to trade her away like a favor, he did something his family would never forgive. We chose her, not quite a daughter. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky carried the weight of it, heavy, waiting. Wind stood at the edge of the Whitmore estate's great hall, invisible in her silence. The chandeliers shimmered above her like distant stars, beautiful, cold, and too high to touch. Her mother had taught her how to pour tea without sound, how to disappear between gold-trimmed walls, and how to smile without showing too much hope. Tonight, the estate buzzed with laughter and power. Politicians, legacy families, daughters in gowns like blooming magnolias, and him, Grayson Whitmore, moved through them all with the stillness of a man born into pressure. His expression never cracked, not even when Margot Whitmore raised her glass and announced his engagement to Zoe Langford. When she didn't flinch, not when the applause roared, not when Zoe stepped forward in a velvet dress and slipped her arm into Grayson's like she belonged there. She just lowered her eyes and stepped back into the shadows. Her hands trembled only slightly against the silver tray. In another room, behind doors she wasn't meant to enter, Margot spoke with the kind of voice women like her use to sign deals, end lives, and arrange futures. "When," Margot said, turning slowly. "You'll go with Mr. Huang tomorrow. His mother called me personally." When she blinked. "Go where?" "A formal dinner. And do smile, won't you? It's time you repay what this family has given you. Your mother has cleaned our floors for 20 years. You've lived here rent-free, eat our food. You attend a private university under our name. This is a small thing to ask." Wenxi's throat tightened, but she bowed slightly, just as her mother had taught her. "Yes, ma'am." "Good girl." Margaret's voice softened, crueler in its kindness. "And stay away from Grayson. People are watching." She passed him once that night on the staircase. He looked past her as if she were the wind. But as she descended the marble steps, she caught the smallest thing. His hand-fist clenched so tightly the veins stood out against his skin. In her room downstairs, bare, quiet, half-lit by the moon, when she sat on her narrow bed, the walls were thin. She could hear her mother coughing in the next room. She'd been pushing herself lately. Too many events, too much bleach on her hands. When she had offered to help clean, but her mother always, "You're meant for better things," she'd say with a tired smile. But when she wasn't sure what that meant anymore. She was 22, quietly intelligent, good with numbers, invisible in every room that mattered. And tonight her heart hurt in a way that didn't feel poetic. It just felt full, bruised, like something inside her had been held too tightly for too long. She thought of the past, of Grayson at 17, cold even then, but kind in ways he never admitted. The boy who passed her a handkerchief when she got sick at the back of the church. The boy who once told a teacher, "That scholarship girl scored higher than all of us, ma'am." She'd always wondered if that version of him still existed, the version who once noticed her. But now, he was marrying someone who danced with the president's daughter, and she was being given away like a gift bag. The next morning, she stood in the foyer in a simple dress Margot had selected for her. Modest, lovely, nothing suggestive, the woman had said, as if Wenxi's entire being might accidentally offend someone. Mr. Huang arrived in a black car with tinted windows and an expensive smile. But before she could step out the door, a voice cut through the air like flint. "She's not going." When she turned, Grayson stood at the top of the stairs, jaw tight, gaze unreadable. Margot's voice cracked like a whip. "Grayson, we've already committed to." "She's not going," he repeated. Then, looking directly at Wenxi, "Go back to school." That was the first time in months he'd spoken to her directly. She didn't move. Grayson descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. "You're not some pawn, Wenxi." Margot's voice went shrill. This is your career we're talking about." But Grayson had already walked past them both. He opened the door and waited. When she stepped through, not looking back. In the car, silence stretched between them. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I did. Your mother's going to hate you." "She already does." When she turned to the window, her reflection blurred by rain just beginning to fall. "Now," she whispered. Grayson's reply came after a long pause. "Because last night, when I saw them announce my engagement, I looked for your reaction, and you didn't give me one." She blinked. "We realized I didn't want to be someone who lost that." Chapter 1. The Girl in the Room Downstairs. The Whitmore estate always smelled faintly of money, fresh orchids, old mahogany, and the kind of silence only the wealthy could afford. When she moved through it like a ghost, she folded towels, the way her mother had taught her, edges sharp, corners lined up, everything crisp. Downstairs in the servants' corridor, the lights were dimmer, the walls thinner, and no one ever knocked before entering. Her room sat at the end of the hallway. No photos, no trinkets, just a desk, a lamp, and a wardrobe of borrowed clothes. There was a small window near the ceiling, where light sometimes poured in, cutting across the bed like a blade. When she liked that, when the sun came through just right, it reminded her that the world above still existed. That morning, the sun didn't come. Instead, a knock, quick and sharp, landed on her door like an order. "Miss Carter," came the clipped voice of Mrs. Hill, the house manager. "Mrs. Whitmore requests your presence in the East Salon." When she stood slowly, her mother was already at work polishing the brass handles upstairs, pretending the call wasn't unusual, pretending, as always, that everything was normal. But nothing about that house was normal, not when you lived in its basement. In the East Salon, Margot Whitmore sat poised like an ice sculpture. She didn't glance up from her tea. "You embarrassed us yesterday," she said evenly. "I was following your instructions," when she replied, her voice soft. "No. You were being looked at, like you were something to want." Margot finally looked at her, eyes calculating. "Don't misunderstand. I don't blame you for Grayson's behavior, but I won't allow it again." Wency felt the heat rise in her chest. "He told me to go. I didn't ask him for anything." "I'm young," Margot said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. "You let him." She leaned forward. "You know, when you were a little girl, I thought you'd grow up to be obedient, grateful. I was wrong." When she didn't Margot smoothed her skirt. "You'll be accompanying us to the Whitmore Foundation Gala this Friday. Nothing flashy, no red, no heels. You'll stand to the side and smile. There to honor your mother's service. Nothing more." "Of course, ma'am." "I win la cunt," Margot added without looking at her. "Don't speak unless spoken to. You are not one of us." That night, when she sat at the edge of her bed, brushing the sleeves of the pale blue dress Margot had sent down, it still had the tags, still smelled like someone else's idea of who she should be. Her mother entered quietly and sat beside her. "You don't have to go, you know," she said gently. "I do." Her mother looked down. "You're so much like your father. Stubborn heart, always trying to carry everything alone." "I don't have a choice." Her mother touched her cheek. "You always have a choice, baby. Even when it..." Friday arrived on a whisper of cold wind and gold leaves skittering across the driveway. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was held at the Fox Theater, a swirl of velvet ropes, press cameras, and Atlanta's most powerful names. When she stood behind the crowd, near the coat room, her dress was demure, her shoes pinched. Her smile was exactly what Margot had asked for. Nothing real. Grayson arrived late. Not with Zoe Langford. Blow. He didn't scan the room. He didn't smile, just walked in like it was another boardroom full of... But halfway through Margot's speech about philanthropy and legacy, he turned slightly. And for a moment, just a breath, his eyes found Wency's in the crowd. She looked away first. Later, near the staircase leading to the mezzanine, he found her. "You hate this, don't you?" he said quietly. "I'm used to it." That's not what I asked. She paused. Yeah. He watched her, his voice low. You shouldn't have to be used to being left. When she's laugh was small. Sad? I'm not less. I'm just not allowed to be more. Grayson stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper now. What if I told you I never wanted that engagement? Then I'd ask why you never said it. He didn't answer.
And neither did she when he reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. Back in her room that night, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Not quite a maid, not quite a daughter, not quite anything. But for the first time in a long time, when she wondered if she didn't belong anywhere, maybe she could choose where she went.
Chapter 2. The Boy Who Didn't Glance Back. Years ago, before the tuxedos and titles, before Grayson Whitmore became Atlanta's most desired bachelor and coldest son, he had a habit of standing in the school library too long after the bell rang. And when she Carter, quiet, polite, unnoticed, used to sit 2 tables behind him. He never said much. But once, when she dropped her stack of books on the floor, scattering pages and notes like a storm, he was the only one who knelt beside her. Upon reaching the doorway, he'd said softly, handing her a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. But I do, and she'd never forgotten it. She was 16 the first time she realized she had feelings for him. He was standing outside the courthouse on career shadowing day, still in his school blazer, staring at the steps like they might swallow him. His father had just finished giving a televised interview about legacy justice. Grayson's face didn't match the pride he was expected to wear. When she had passed by with her lunch in a paper bag, still too shy to speak. But he'd noticed her. Their eyes met. And even then, he didn't smile. But he nodded. Like she was real. That was enough for her. In those years, they passed like shadows in the halls of privilege. She, the maid's daughter, attending the Whitmore's elite academy on a sponsorship. He, the heir with cufflinks older than her mother's paycheck. But somehow, between calculus and corridor glances, he became the only boy who didn't look at her with pity or pride. He just looked, and she didn't know it at the time, but that would be the most dangerous thing. On graduation night, the students threw their caps in the air, and champagne sprayed across the private lawn like rain. When she didn't join the celebration, she sat under the magnolia tree near the tennis court, hands in her lap, watching stars instead of fireworks. He found her there. "You're not with the others," he'd said. "Neither are you." He sank onto the grass beside her, jacket off, sleeves rolled, quiet for a long while. "Will you ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Only the time," she whispered. "Where would you go?" She hesitated. "Somewhere I wasn't someone's charity. Somewhere I wasn't a favor kept too long." He nodded. "Yeah." That was all. He didn't promise her anything. He didn't reach for her hand. Didn't kiss her. He just sat beside her until the lights went out on the lawn. And when he left,
He didn't glance back. In the present, when she watched Grayson from a hallway window, the estate was buzzing with preparations for his wedding to Zoe Langford. The staff was instructed not to look directly at the guests. The floor was polished to a mirror. She remembered the boy under the magnolia tree, and then the man who signed a contract to marry someone else. Same eyes, different person. That evening, she climbed the back stairs to deliver a file Margot had requested, but when she reached the office door, she paused. Inside, she heard Grayson's voice. "I don't love her," he said, his voice flat, "but she makes sense." Zoe's laughter followed. "Love isn't the point, darling. Power is. And together, we're untouchable." When she felt her throat tighten, as she placed the folder on the ground and turned quietly back down the stairs. Later that night, she sat in the garden, the air cool and still. A few stray leaves clung to her hair. Grayson found her again. "You heard, didn't you?" When she didn't look up. "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." She turned. Why? Because you're sorry? Because I was a secret you didn't think would stay silent forever? I never thought of you as a secret. Then what was I? He didn't answer. Just silence. When she stood, brushing dirt from her palms. You never looked back, Grayson. Not when I was beneath that tree. Not when I left school. Not once. She stepped past him. And this time, he turned. But she didn't.
Chapter 3. What belongs to the family? It wasn't a question. The note left on Wenxi's nightstand said it plainly. Dresses in the closet, 7 p.m. sharp. Dinner with Mr. Easton. There was no signature. Margot never signed orders, only expectations. The dress was beige silk, understated, expensive, empty of joy. Her mother's voice echoed from years ago. A gift that comes with strings is just a leash. Still, Wenxi wore it. Because there were rules here, spoken and otherwise. And the first one was this: when the family gives you something, you say thank you, even when it costs your dignity. The restaurant wasn't one she'd ever been inside, only passed while delivering dry cleaning. It was all glass and candlelight and people who didn't eat what they ordered. A valet opened the door before she could reach for it. Huang Easton was already seated, his blazer draped across the back of the chair, collar open, Rolex glinting like a promise he never intended to keep. "You're more punctual than I expected," he said, his smile all charm and no weight. "I don't like to waste time." He raised an eyebrow. "Sharp tongue? Interesting. Most girls the Whitmores parade in front of me just blink and agree." "I'm not a Whitmore." "No," she said, leaning forward. "You're something else entirely." The meal went on, like a negotiation, casual on the surface, but sharp underneath. He asked about school. She answered briefly. It complimented her smile. She ignored it. He reached for her hand when the wine came, and she pulled away without flinching. "You don't like being touched?" he asked, amused. "I don't like being bought." There was a flicker then, something behind his teeth that resembled respect, or perhaps warning. "You think Grayson's going to save you from all this?" he asked, tilting his glass toward her. "Because he's not. That man bleeds ice." When she stared at him, "I'm not looking to be saved. I just want out." He laughed, rich and low. "There is no out. There's only trade." Back at the estate, the house glowed like a palace, beautiful and hollow. She handed her coat to the staff and began heading for the stairs. But Grayson was there, waiting. "You went," he said, voice unreadable. "You told me to go back to school. Your mother told me otherwise. She doesn't control you." "She does," Wenxi said quietly. "She just lets you think you're the one holding the leash." Grayson's jaw flexed. Then, after a beat, he said, "Did he touch you?" A long pause. Grayson's voice dropped lower. When she stared him down. "Does it matter?" He looked away. She stepped past him. "That's what I thought." Later that night, a knock came at her door. Not Mrs. Hill, not Margot. "Grayson?" He didn't wait to be invited in. "You're not doing that again." "Doing what?" "Being paraded." "You think I chose that?" Her voice was cold now. "You stood there while your mother handed me off like a wine bottle, and you said nothing?" His eyes flashed. "Because I can't stop what I don't own." "Then?" "You don't own me, Grayson." "I know." More silence. "Then why are you here?" His voice broke then, just slightly. "Because I wish I did." The next morning, a new dress was delivered to her door. Black velvet, simple, stunning, no note. She folded it carefully, placed it in the bottom drawer, and never wore it. Because it wasn't a gift. It was a message. And she didn't belong to anyone. Not anymore. Chapter 4. The man she called brother. The next morning, Wenxi's mother was polishing the grand staircase banister when she called out quietly, "You've been summoned." When she looked up, by who? Mrs. Whitmore. No surprise there. But when she entered the study, it wasn't Margot sitting behind the massive desk. It was Grayson, alone, elbows on the glass, jaw tight. Closed the door. When she obeyed, the room clicked into silence. He gestured toward the chair across from him, but she stayed standing. He studied her like he was memorizing something, or searching for it. Finally he spoke. Easton said you were cold. Is that a complaint? No, he said. It's a relief. She didn't answer. Neither did he. Then, suddenly too sharp, he asked, do you still think of me as your brother? When she's breath caught. But she wanted to lie, to keep things clean. But something in his voice, low, strained, almost pleading, kept her honest. And for a long time. Later at school, she sat in the back row of her political theory class, unable to hear a word. Her notebook was blank, her coffee untouched. Outside, the wind carried the scent of burning leaves, and the shadows of the Whitmore name stretched further than she could measure. A classmate passed her a note scribbled in messy pen. You okay? Heard rumors. Ignore them. You're stronger than all of them. Lila. She smiled faintly, folded the note, slipped it into her sleeve. But strong wasn't what she felt. She felt watched, whispered about, weighed and never chosen. At dusk, she climbed to the rooftop garden behind the law library, her quiet place. The sun dripped gold across the city's skyline. She didn't hear the footsteps until he spoke. He left the file on my desk. Grayson stood behind her, no jacket, sleeves rolled like he used to be. It wasn't for you, she said. It was for Margot. I read it anyway. She turned to face him. You're engaged. I'm not married. Wenfei's voice trembled. Stop this. We stepped closer. I can't. You have to. I've tried. Their breath caught in the same cold wind. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. That's the problem, he said. I think I do. She stepped back, needing distance. You think guilt is love? No, Grayson replied. But I think silence is cowardice, and I've been silent too long. Wenfei's eyes filled, but she blinked it back. So what are we? He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd buried for years. And then he said the one thing she wasn't ready to hear. Siblings. Back in her room, she stared at the old photograph tucked behind her mirror. A younger Grayson standing beside her at a Whitmore summer gala, her dress too short, his hand hovering protectively behind her back. He hadn't looked at her that night, but he was always near. She pulled the photo down and tucked it away, because the boy in that photo no longer existed. And the man he'd become was dangerously close to reaching for her with both hands. Chapter 5. The engagement that meant nothing. The ring was flawless, 2.7 carats, cushion cut and cold as the woman wearing it. Zoe Langford lifted her hand, just slightly, enough for the photographers to catch it as they circled the entrance of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. A sparkle, a promise, a lie. Grayson stood beside her, one hand resting in his pocket, the other brushing lightly against her back. Every move choreographed, every smile a mask. When she stood near the back entrance, on silent staff duty, she wasn't invited. She never was. But she was always there, dressed in black, carrying things that didn't belong. Zoe's voice floated across the lobby like perfume. It's time for the speech, darling. Grayson said nothing. But when she noticed it, his fingers flexed before he offered her his arm. Earlier that week, when she had uncovered something she wasn't meant to find. A guest list draft with a handwritten annotation beside Zoe's name. Press leverage. Attach foundation funding if needed. Margot had written it, cold, clinical, and next to Grayson's. Apply. Visibility critical for election cycle. It wasn't a marriage, it was a contract, a public strategy, a script where every word was rehearsed. That night at the gala, Zoe stepped onto the stage to introduce Grayson. "My fiancé," she purred into the mic, "has not only captured my heart, but has restored my faith in legacy, loyalty, and the future of Atlanta." Polite applause. When she felt bile rise in her throat, Grayson stepped forward. His voice was clear, measured, controlled. But in the second row, someone else clapped too loudly. Lang Easton. And when she turned, he was staring at her. Not the stage, her. And he smiled. After the speech, when she tried to slip out the side door, but someone blocked it. "Target. You need to understand something," she said, voice low, eyes bright with warning. "We gave you shelter, education, a place at our table. Do not mistake that for inclusion." "I never did," when she whispered. Margot leaned in. "Then, act like it." When she made it as far as the elevator, when she heard shouting from the upper balcony, "Zoe. And Grayson." "You think I don't see it?" Zoe hissed. "The way you watch her when you think I'm not looking?" Grayson's voice was low, steady. "You said yourself, this isn't about love." "It is now," Zoe snapped, "because I don't lose." When she turned and left before she could hear more. 2 nights later, Grayson came to Wency's room, unannounced, uninvited. He closed the door behind him and said nothing at first. Then slowly, he pulled something from his pocket. The engagement ring. Zoe returned it this morning. When she stared at him, heart thundering, "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I never wanted to give it to her," he said. "Then why did you?" He met her eyes. "Because I was too late." When she stepped back, "You're still too late." He flinched, quiet. And then he said, almost like a confession, "But I'm not done trying." The next day, Margot summoned her. But this time, it wasn't about dresses or donors. It was about damage control. "I want you gone," Margot said flatly. When she didn't ask why, she already knew. Grayson had chosen her, and that made her a threat. Margot slid a plane ticket across the table. "There's a program in Chicago, graduate level, prestigious enough. You leave Saturday." When she stared at the ticket, and she folded it, slowly, quietly. "I'll go," she said. Margot blinked. "Just like that?" "No," when she whispered. "Not just like that." That evening, she left a note on Grayson's desk. "And follow me. Not this time." But she knew he would. Because this time, she wasn't just leaving a house, and she was leaving the only man who had ever made her feel seen. And it was killing her. Chapter 6. The night he asked for consent. The apartment was barely more than a box. A mattress on the floor, a flickering lamp, one cracked window that overlooked nothing but shadows. When she liked it that way, it was hers. And no one knocked here, no one gave orders, no one told her who she could or couldn't be. Until tonight. There was a knock, and she already knew who it was. She didn't open the door right away. Instead, she stood on the other side, her hand on the knob, forehead against the wood. She told herself not to move. But she did. When she opened the door, Grayson stood there, drenched in rain, hair messy, no driver, no coat. Just him. Unarmored. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "You weren't invited." "I know." He stood there, water pooling around his shoes, and then, softly, "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, he didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just looked at the little space she'd made her own. A chipped mug on the table, a photo of her and her mother, the folded ticket to Chicago. "Why long have you lived here?" he asked quietly. 3 months. He nodded once. "And I never knew." When she looked at him. "Because you never asked." She moved to the kitchenette, pouring tea that had long gone cold. She didn't offer him any. Still he spoke. I'm not marrying Zoe. It's over. I figured. I told my mother I won't run for office next year. You'll regret that. I won't. He finally met her eyes. Because it was never my dream, it was hers. And I'm done letting other people script my life. When she turned away. I leave tomorrow, she said. Time? He took a breath. Don't go. She didn't reply. I'm not asking you to stay because I'm lonely, he added, softer now, or because I feel guilty. I'm asking you to stay because I love you. The words hung between them like wet silk. She closed her eyes. You don't even know how to love. You're right, he said, stepping forward. But I'm learning, and I want to learn with you. Silence stretched like a wound. Then he whispered, I'll marry you. When she flinched. I don't want that, she said quickly. Why? Because you think love fixes everything. It doesn't. I don't want it to fix anything, he said. I just want it to be real. She turned, hard in her throat. And then he said the only thing that could break her. Then I will marry you, but I need your consent. No pressure, no expectation. Just a man, bare, waiting. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough to remember what it was like to love him, quietly, for years, in silence. And then she did something she hadn't done since they were teenagers. She reached for his hand. I'm scared, she whispered. Am I? If I say yes? You won't belong to me, he said. You'll belong with me. That undid her. They didn't kiss. They didn't promise forever. But she leaned her head against his chest, and for the first time he held her like a man who wasn't afraid to break. And she let him. That night, she didn't say yes. But she didn't say no. And for Grayson Whitmore, the man who never needed permission, that was everything. Chapter 7. The girl he couldn't let go. She left before sunrise. No goodbye, no note, just a cup of untouched tea on the counter and a folded blanket on the arm of the chair where he'd sat the night before. Grayson arrived at the apartment 15 minutes too late. The door was unlocked. The silence was final. And the ticket to Chicago was gone. At the Whitmore estate, Margot stood on the terrace in a silk robe, watching the koi ripple through the pond as if nothing had changed. But it had. Her son was no longer hers. He didn't ask for her opinion when he stormed into the study. He didn't wait for her to finish her sentence. You knew she was leaving. I encouraged it. You sent her away, like she was a problem. Margot turned slowly. Because she is. Olivia's eyes widened. Grayson's voice cut sharp. She was the only thing keeping me human. You don't have the luxury of being human. He stared at her, a breath trembling in his chest. Then I want no part of this family. Later that day, the Whitmore name was plastered across legal filings as a public corruption case hit the news. One of Margot's longtime political allies had been exposed. The firm Grayson worked for requested his cooperation in the internal investigation. And for the first time in his career, he refused. When she was on the train to Chicago when she saw the headline, Grayson Whitmore recuses himself from high-profile Whitmore estate case. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands tightened around the edges of her book, but her eyes never moved. She wanted to believe it wasn't about her. But she knew better. Back in Atlanta, Grayson's decision cost him everything. He was suspended from his position without pay. News anchors questioned his judgment. Old friends vanished overnight. But none of it mattered. Because when she was gone, and every room in that estate echoed with the absence of her silence. 2 weeks later, Margot summoned him. He didn't respond. So she came to him. In the study where his father once held court. She closed the door behind her and said with a voice quieter than usual, "You're going to destroy yourself over a girl who doesn't even belong to this family. She never wanted to. She'll forget you. I hope not. Margot exhaled, like the weight of a whole dynasty pressed on her chest. While you keep going down this path, you'll lose everything. Grayson looked at her, his voice low. Then let me lose everything, just not her. In Chicago, when she took up a temporary job cataloging archives in the law school basement. Quiet, lonely, safe. She didn't reach out. Didn't post. She didn't reply. But every night she held a small, wrinkled photo in her hand, the one from that long-ago summer gala where Grayson had stood behind her, too close not to mean something. And every morning she told herself she made the right choice. Until the day a letter arrived. No return address, no name. Inside was a single sentence. I never stopped waiting. And the deed to the Whitmore family estate, signed over to her. Chapter 8. The Arrest. The rain came down in sheets that morning. Atlanta rain, the kind that felt like consequence. When she stood across the street from the courthouse, dressed simply, a folder clutched in her hands, her name was not on the list, her presence was not required. But she came anyway. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with tension. Cameras. Whispered speculation, the kind of political bloodbath the press loved. Zoe Langford sat at the defense table, a vision of control in ivory silk. Grayson stood alone at the witness stand. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, can you confirm the identity of the person who supplied falsified statements to the ethics committee last fall? Grayson's voice didn't tremble. He said, steady and clear, it was Miss Zoe Langford. Gasps. Papers shifted. Zoe turned, her expression cracking for the first time. You're lying, she hissed, too low for the mic. You swore you'd protect my name. I never swore to protect your crimes. You did this for her, she spat, voice rising. For that Maid's daughter. The judge slammed the gavel once, twice. But the damage was done. Outside the courthouse, the headlines wrote themselves. Zoe Langford indicted in Whitmore political scandal. Grayson Whitmore testifies against fiancé in stunning term. When she turned away before the cameras could catch her face. She walked back into the rain like she belonged to it. That evening, Zoe was arrested in her family's penthouse apartment. The photo of her being escorted out in cuffs made national news. Margaret Whitmore didn't appear on any press release, but inside the estate she sat by the fireplace, staring into flames that refused to warm her. You burned everything, she whispered when Grayson walked in. And for what? He didn't answer. She looked at him. Truly looked. You love her that much? Grayson didn't blink. Enough to lose you. Margot's voice cracked. Then lose me. And he did. The next morning, a black car pulled up outside Wenshie's apartment building in Chicago. She didn't recognize the driver, but the envelope he handed her bore the Whitmore seal. Inside, a one-line message in Grayson's handwriting. I told the truth. You're next. And a plane ticket. She arrived in Atlanta the next day. By then, everything had unraveled. The foundation gala was canceled, campaign donors had fled, Margot had vanished from public life. But Grayson stood taller than ever, ruined, unmoored, but finally honest. She found him in the old garden, sleeves rolled, trimming roses by hand. He looked up, saw her, and didn't smile. He just said, I thought I dreamed you. Inch forward. You didn't. They stood there in the silence of falling petals. And then she reached for his hand. This time, she was the one who asked, May I stay? He looked down at their joined hands. Only if it's your choice. When we whispered, it always was. Chapter 9. The last time she called him brother. The Whitmore estate looked different now. No guests, no parties, no politics. Just silence. When she stood in the hallway outside the study, her hand resting on the edge of the door she used to avoid. The house smelled like old wood and endings. Inside, Grayson was sorting through old files, family trusts, political statements, letters with seals that no longer held power. "I'm leaving," she said. He didn't look up. "I know. Chicago offered me a full fellowship, civil justice, public defense." Now he looked at her. "You always wanted to fight for the people no one else saw." A soft smile ghosted her lips. "Like someone once saw me?" The study dimmed as the clouds passed overhead. She stepped forward and placed something on the desk. A photograph. It was old, creased, taken the summer she turned 17. She and Grayson sat under the magnolia tree, sun in their hair, youth in their eyes. He wasn't smiling, but he was looking at her. "That was enough? Do you remember this?" "I never forgot it." She nodded, her voice barely above breath. "I used to call you brother, in my head. It felt safer that way. Cleaner, easier." Grayson closed his eyes. "I hated it." And she laughed softly. "I know." Outside, the wind picked up, the same kind that always moved through this house like a reminder of what couldn't be kept. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bracelet he'd once given her during her first year of college. Cheap metal, faded clasp, but she'd never thrown it away. She laid it gently on the desk beside the photo. "I think it's time I stop carrying things that don't belong to me anymore." Grayson's jaw flexed. Then slowly, he stood. And for the first time, he didn't reach for her. He bowed his head and whispered, "Then go." At the airport, when she sat by the window, watching the plane pull in through glass that barely held back the sky, her phone buzzed. No number. The message read, "I let you go because I thought it was love, but maybe real love doesn't ask people to stay. It gives them the courage to leave." She didn't cry. She just pressed her fingers against the glass and whispered, "Goodbye." Back in Atlanta, Grayson stood alone in the garden she used to tend when no one was watching. The wind moved the magnolia petals in slow spirals across the path. He bent down, picked one up, and tucked it in his pocket. Then, for the first time in years, he looked back. But this time, she was already gone. Chapter 10. The House She Belonged to. 1 year passed. Not all at once, but in quiet days, in slow healing. The Whitmore estate had changed. The marble floors still gleamed, but the voices echoing down the halls now belonged to clients, caseworkers, law students, and single mothers seeking a name on a lease they could finally sign. It wasn't a mansion anymore. It was a legal aid center, and on its front gate, newly restored, stood a bronze plaque. Unheard. For the unseen, for those who stayed and those who left. When she stepped through that gate, just as a gust of spring wind carried magnolia petals across the path, she paused, looked up, and smiled. She wore a dark blazer, a case file in her hand, confidence in her walk. She didn't come back as a guest, or a servant. She came back as the director. Inside, the garden was alive again, more than it had ever been. A little girl with braids skipped across the lawn, trailing chalk dust and justice in her wake. When she greeted the staff, signed a few files, and stepped into the study, the only room that hadn't been redesigned, it still smelled like memory. She walked to the desk, where her name now sat engraved on a plaque. Lindsay Carter-esque. Director, Whitmore Justice Project. Her fingers brushed the wood. "You found your place," a voice said behind her. She turned. Grayson stood in the doorway. Same gray eyes, no tie, a softness in his posture now, no armor. He held a coffee in one hand, a file in the other. "I thought you weren't coming today," she said. "I told my mother I had somewhere better to be." When she smiled, "How is she?" "Teaching how to lose." They sat across from each other in the old leather chairs that once knew nothing but silence. I saw your interview on PBS, he said. You didn't mention me. I didn't need to, she replied. This place is mine. He nodded, and pulled something from his coat pocket. A bracelet. Old, tarnished, still hers. He placed it gently on the desk between them. Forgot this. No, she said softly. I left it. He looked up. Why? Because I wanted to see if you'd carry it for me. He held her gaze. I always will. That evening, the center hosted its first gala, not for the elite, but for the clients they'd helped that year. Women in second-hand dresses, fathers who'd regained custody, immigrants who now had names on mailboxes. When she stood at the back, as the lights twinkled and laughter rose, a boy no older than 10 ran up to her, handing her a crayon drawing of the garden. You live here? He asked. No, she said, crouching to his height, but I belong here. Later, when the guests had gone and the garden had gone quiet, she and Grayson walked the path beneath the magnolia trees. Would you ever think about what it could have been like if we'd met different? He asked. She shook her head. I think about how we met exactly when we were supposed to, when neither of us could pretend anymore. He stopped walking, turned to her. I still have the ring. When she laughed quietly, still? I was hoping you might try it on this time. She took it gently from his hand, slipped it on. Perfect fit. They didn't make a scene? There was no grand proposal, no flashbulbs. Just two people in a garden built from everything they'd survived. And this time, they walked forward together, not because they had to, but because they finally could. The Canary flew home. Some love stories don't begin with fireworks. They began in silence, in a hallway where she was told to smile but not speak, in a house she could walk through but never call her own, in a glance from a boy who was never allowed to look back. Wendy Carter was never supposed to belong, but she stayed, quietly, kindly, until kindness became a form of rebellion. And Grayson Whitmore? He was born with everything, but knew nothing until the day he chose to lose it all for a girl without a last name worth printing. They didn't fall in love like the world expected. They fell in love the way people do when there's too much history, too much silence, and too many years spent almost saying the truth. But in the end, it wasn't the engagement rings or the scandals or the garden full of witnesses that mattered. It was this: a boy who asked, "May I?" and a girl who finally said, Maybe love isn't about who stays the loudest. Maybe it's about who sees you when you're quiet, when you're forgotten, when you're folding towels in a room downstairs and still carrying grace-like armor. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, if you've ever given love without being chosen back, if you've ever walked away not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself, then this story was always about you. Who did you walk away from so you could become who you are now? We're listening, and love, as always, finds its way.